Welcome to the Resurrection and Waiting podcast with Pastor Eddie Briery. We're having raw, real, and transparent conversations about how God meets us in the dead places of our lives. Click subscribe to follow us on the journey, and we hope you find life in this episode of the Resurrection and Waiting podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Resurrection and Waiting podcast. Today, we have a dear friend on the podcast, and we are actually filming at their location in downtown Shreveport at the purchased building for the Hub Urban Ministries. So if you are in the Shreveport-Bossier region or the Arklatex, you're probably no stranger to Miss Cassie Hammett and the Hub Urban Ministry. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. But before that, we want to let you know the building is live. There are women in there watching a movie. There are people working, going back and forth. So if you hear background noise, that means kingdom work is taking place. So we are in their space this afternoon. So Cassie, tell us a little bit about yourself, the ministry, what all you guys have going on, and give the listener a snapshot of all things the Hub.
Hey, everybody. My name is Cassie, and I am the founder and executive director of the Hub here in Shreveport. That's our home base. We have locations across the country now in six different cities. We have the Hub Las Vegas. We have the Hub Lafayette. We have a purchase in Fort Worth. We have a purchase in Northeast Louisiana. We have the Hub in Macomb, Mississippi, a little random small town, killing it. And then up and coming, the Hub in Denver.
Denver, Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fun fact about Macomb, Mississippi, one of your staff members has an affinity for all things dirt cheap. The dirtiest dirt cheap in America.
Shout out. We're taking sponsors from Dirt Cheap if you'll get it.
At Dirt Cheap on Insta is the dirtiest dirt cheap in the planet.
It's got the Bossier one beat, then it's got to be dirty.
It's in the dirty Macomb, Mississippi. Fun fact about
no offense, Macomb,
Mississippi.
Yeah, so I'm the executive director of the Shreveport location. We call it the Mothership. I've been doing it for 15 years here. I was born and raised in Shreveport. I'm married to who I call my tall drink of fine, Brent Hammett. And we have 2 kids, Liv and Esther. They're 10 and 7.
Awesome. So Cassie's on the podcast today for a number of reasons. She's a friend. She attends our church. We partner in ministry together. But one thing about Cassie's life is that she understands the importance of a tribe. She understands the importance of living in community, living in the right community, the dangers of the wrong community. So today we're going to talk about just the importance of community as a whole. And I found this quote that I wanted to read about community today, and it says this: "Let him who cannot be alone be aware of community, but let him who is not in community be aware of being alone." So it speaks of this idea that community is a huge thing in the life of not only believers, but in people in general. We were created to be communal beings. And that the quote to me says, the guy who doesn't have a community is in danger, but the guy who puts his identity in the community is in danger. Yep. So there's this balance. So you, more than most people that I know, understand the importance of this. You lead your organization that way. Tribe is a big deal to you. So jump into that conversation for us about tribal living, community living, just cannonball. Let's go.
Yeah. So I think it's really hilarious to ask someone to cannonball into such a giant topic.
Yes.
But I was thinking about, as I was preparing for today, just the idea of community and tribe and all of the ways, that quote that you read, I feel like I have lived both sides of that, and how important tribe and community has been, but also how hurt I've been in a lot of ways as a result of the same kind of concept, right, of community and tribe. And I was thinking about as a leader, so I have a bunch of different perspectives when I come into this conversation. I think one, I could put on a leadership hat and have a ton to say about tribe and how to do that as a leader, because that is and I do want to talk about that, because that is a very, and when I say leader, I mean in any concept, not ministry, just in any way. But then I have a personal hat that I could wear and talk about tribe and community in my own personal life. And then the third thing I was thinking through is just what I've seen of the importance of tribe for the populations that the Hub serves, and what a life looks like truly without tribe.
So let's jump in. Let's take those in order.
Okay.
Let's jump in because I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast are pastors. A lot of them are business leaders, business owners, even parents leading a little tribe of their own kids and community neighborhood kids. Let's talk about it from a leadership vein.
Yeah.
Like in your mind, what are the benefits of the tribe idea in regards to leading people?
Yeah. So my context is leading a team. So I'm currently a team of, I think 16, I lose track, but a middle-sized team of people. So that's the context that I'm coming into this conversation with. And for me, I'm just speaking for myself. When I think about my preference as a leader is to lead in a way that builds a tribe. So as a team, it's not a place of employment as much as it is a tribe. Now, I do have some disclaimers that go with that.
Right.
But I think you have two kind of extremes when you're talking about leadership. You can either lead an organization in a corporate sense, right, where it's a job, people come in, people come out. There's these really hard boundaries there. It's a little more of a cold environment. And that's even true in the nonprofit world. I'm not even talking about business corporate. I mean, that's a choice that some leaders, even in ministry, make is to lead in that sense. And then you swing all the way to the other side, which is where, and I hope we get to this story, but where I started, which is an unhealthy version of making a tribe, right? There is an unhealthy version for a leader of that. And so after 15 years of knowing those two extremes, now people who know me know I'm never going to be close to this corporate. Right. I don't even know how to fake that. So I've never swung that far except for out of some self-protection. There was a season of post-hurt where I felt driven towards, okay, I just need to go that direction, right? Just put some walls up, be super cold, not cold, but because I was hurt.
Isolated.
Yeah.
Protected.
So the choice that I make as a leader on a daily basis is to try to hold the middle ground between corporate, cold, non-relational, and a fancy word for it would be enmeshment, which is the unhealthy sort of tribalism in a sense. So I do and I'm a human and I screw this up all the time, but I do my very best to hold the middle ground, to lead and create a culture and space that is a place for our team, not just the people we're serving, but for our team to belong, to find healing in their own personal lives, and for us to carry out the vision of the hub relationally with each other with boundaries. And so to be honest with you, that's the harder choice out of the options. Those extremes are way easier. Sure. It's way easier to go full corporate, sort of, cold, non-relational, or to go fully enmeshed in each other. Those are easier than holding that middle ground. And so every day I have to evaluate that. I mean, that is I have sort of a short little list I run through as a leader almost every morning. And one of the things that I'm always checking is, am I holding that tension well? Am I creating space for this team to belong and to feel like family while also having a culture that's healthy? So that's sort of the perspective after all of these years of experience where I've landed.
Right. So on that thought, being one of the pastors that sits on an advisory team for you, we have heard you say and even prayed for in the hiring process somebody that fits a particular culture.
Yeah.
So there are significant dangers as a leader of bringing someone on the team, bringing somebody on staff or into the organization that doesn't carry the culture of the organization. Now, you've probably experienced that from a bad perspective, but how important is the protection of culture in your perspective?
Yeah. So to me, one of the key roles of a leader is creating culture. Yep. But there's a second part to that I think a lot of times people don't think about or talk about when it comes to leadership. So creating culture is one thing, guarding it is a whole other thing. And I think both are the role of a leader. Again, it's easier to create it. It's harder to guard it, right? Internal culture. So I don't mean external, what people think when they hear the hub.
We're talking tribal culture.
Yeah, inside, internal team culture to me is sort of the first domino in a lot of ways that affects everything. Because Whatever is happening internally eventually shows externally, whether good or bad, right? Like you can only fake it if you have bad internal culture for so long. You can get away with it for a little while, but eventually that begins to show because that's just the nature of what happens. And so now what I'm not saying is it's like some weird cultish kind of culture, right? But it's just understanding that what we're doing here at the Hub demands in some ways a certain way of doing it, right? A certain culture, and guarding that by who joins the team. Sometimes, unfortunately, guarding that by who leaves the team, which is another thing leaders don't like to talk about, but sometimes those decisions are a part of guarding culture. So again, things that I'm practicing all the time is how do I guard the culture that God has spoken into, not one that I just like pulled out of my butt, and just was like, let's do this. But like over all of these years, what matters internally and how do I guard that? And so that's a big part of leading and creating a space where people belong, because if you have a clear culture, it draws the right people, but it also pushes out.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So for those of you that are listening and you're like, okay, I'm not into the terminology, culture could be identified as like the organizational heartbeat. Maybe for your family, if you have a vision statement for your family says, in our family, we believe X. Yep. Well, culture is the action of what you're saying you believe. So in your world, it may be, hey, you know what? We don't do this or do that, but we do this or do that. That's your culture. So if you're listening and you're like, man, I don't know what they talking about with this culture. I'm not a leader. I'm just a person. Well, we're going to give you a snapshot of that in just a minute. So that will help you. So let's jump to the people that the Hub serves. So the Hub, if you don't know the Hub, so Cassie and her team essentially have devoted their life to people in significant need on every spectrum: emotional, physical, mental, poverty, trafficked victims, all the things. And these people are some of them are essentially living out the product of bad tribes. Some of them have found a tribe within a very broken place. And we've learned a lot about community through watching the lives of the impoverished. So give us a snapshot of what you've learned, good and bad, from your life's devotion to the people that are in significant need.
Yeah. So when it comes to the population, so we serve primarily those in homelessness, experiencing poverty, addiction, mental illness, sexual exploitation, women in the sex industry, victims of sex trafficking. So just groups of people that are experiencing extreme trauma and isolation and unspeakable pain. Every single person that we're serving lands there. And I think that one thing that I've learned through them is how much I need them in my tribe. And I think that that's not something that people talk about a lot, right? Like I think a lot of times we think about those in need as the people that we're called to serve, when in reality, the better thing for my life is if they're in my tribe. Like I have been forever changed because they're a part of who I am. They're a part of my rhythms. They're a part of my life. They're who's calling me on the phone. They're telling me happy birthday every year. Like instead of it just being like they need a tribe, it's like, no, I need them in a lot of ways. It's just, I just believe it is the way that God created us, is that we need all walks of life in our tribe. And when we don't, when we see the negative effects of that, when we only surround ourselves with people who look like us, think like us, have the same skin color, all of those things, we see what happens. We've been living that out though over the last forever, but really it's been kind of flared up in the last few years of what happens when your tribe is only just like you. And so that was one thing I was thinking about is the ways that like I have been changed by them, by the people that we're serving who aren't so different than me. That's the truth. Like, a lot of our stories are very similar. A lot of the root issues at play are the same. And so on one hand, I want to start by saying that I need them. I need every single person that we serve more than they need me. But I think there's a decision that has to be made between simply serving the poor or serving the broken or however you want to say it. You have to make a choice to go past that and say, okay, but like, what would it look like if they were my friend and they were my community? And on the other side, a lot of the fallout that we're seeing in people's lives actually does boil back to tribe. Unhealthy, damaging, abusive communities and people. And it's interesting to me to think about how the enemy works, that like God is a relational God. That is who he is. And most people that we encounter have been completely devastated by relationships, right? Like when you boil their story all the way back, it's not the behaviors that they're doing. A lot of their trauma comes from the hands of people or groups of people who were the wrong tribe. And so at the Hub, we have the 4 R's that we use to sort of guide our ministry. They're like the 4 pillars of what we do here. And the second one is relationship, because for all the reasons that we're saying, we believe that a huge part of healing from addiction, trauma, whatever long list of things we could talk about, one of the biggest parts of the fuel of that healing is people. And we know that because we've experienced in our own lives. When we go through something traumatic and we have healthy, whole community to walk us through it, we know what it feels like to have that fuel in our lives at the hardest time of our lives. Well, the people that we're serving and getting to walk with, they don't know what that feels like, that the bottom drops out of their life and they're alone, right? Like totally alone, either totally alone or the people they're with are the people who are harming them. Sure. And that's their only people because of isolation and abuse. And so I've just learned the only thing that really matters to them is relationship. Like we could throw them fancy programs. We could spin anything we wanted to spin at them, right? But like at the end of the day, they don't care about all of that. They want to look in your eyes and know you're my people. And it's like it's currency because they've never had it. And I think that has changed me because of my early history. Some point along the way, I picked up the idea that I would never have that I would never have a tribe of people that were for me. Yeah. And I picked that. I don't even know when I did. I picked it up and I will never forget Callie Pirtle, shout out if she's listening. I didn't even know her, but the Lord moved in her to come find me after church. And she pulled me into one of the nursery rooms and said something along the lines of like, you wear no one understands me like a badge of honor. And like, you're not letting people in. And it was then that I realized like that was true. And it wasn't because I thought I was better than people. It was because I had been hurt and had decided that because I was in leadership, this stupid saying that people say and they say all the time, and it was spoken over me for years, was it's lonely at the top. And man, that's a load of bull. I didn't know that at the time. And I picked up this idea that like, oh, okay, I guess that's true. I guess that I'll move through this city because Shreveport's not that big. And when you're here for as long as the Hub's been here, like I'll move through a day and people will know my name and people will know who I am and what I do, but no one will ever really know me. And I carried that for a long time. But it was out of an unhealthy view of tribe in my early years as leadership. And then it's almost like I swung over to say, I won't ever have that. Not I don't want it, because I did, but I'll never have it because it's lonely at the top. And I guess that's what this means. And so walking with the impoverished started to heal that in me. Like, okay, but like if it's so powerful in their lives and if them being known by people matters so much, then it probably should matter and does matter to me. And I had to have this like reckoning in that season that I actually, at the time, there wasn't anyone who really did know me, like besides Brent, right. My husband, and my family. But like, outside of that all of my relationships were surface. And a lot of that was my doing because I was self-protection. And so I had to sort of, through therapy and through relationships like with Callie and with people who were willing to sort of step over that line that I had drawn and said, you go no further from here because I don't want to be hurt. Years of healing to get me to where I am now. And so I feel like I want to write a book about this or something because like I've lived it, right? Like I've lived.
She's accountable for it now. Yeah, it's on a podcast now.
Mark it down. But I just wish other people knew or I wish I could tell other people, free them up from my experience.
So when I look at that whole block about walking with the impoverished, it's lonely at the top, I see this stark difference than what culture paints and the way of Jesus. So the way of Jesus essentially was to come and call 12 leftovers that society didn't pick, that religion didn't pick, that were just average people doing average things. And he called them and says, not after you get your life together, while you're in this, if you'll follow me, I'll teach you how to be a kingdom person. And so Jesus had a tribe of people that wouldn't have gotten picked today.
Me. People like me.
People that are like total, like I relate with Peter. Like, bro, you always talk at the wrong time. You do the wrong things. He said, pray,
Slow
you
down.
went to sleep. He said, pray, you cut a dude's ear off. Everything I asked you to do, you did the other thing. So there's that. And then this whole lonely at the top deal, which I think all high capacity leaders at some point should struggle with. They should wrestle with that. Even as a dad, like let's take this down to a dad.
Yeah.
Dads shouldn't dad alone.
That's right.
Mom shouldn't mom
right.
alone, no matter what the top of your pyramid is in your organizational structure, which may be your family or a coach on a team or a small group leader in a church. You shouldn't do whatever you do alone.
Yeah.
Right. So when I look at the life of Jesus, Jesus teaches us that the best way to lead is at eye level. Like the best way to lead is with the people. And
That's
he
right.
says essentially like, I don't have to tell you what to do. Walk with me for 3 years, model what I do, then teach other people to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I think some of my so if most people don't know this, but the Hub started accidentally out of the trunk of my car. It wasn't a plan. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't have a nonprofit plan. Ultimately, I was only 21 and I had no idea what was happening, right? And so early on, this tribe formed around what was happening in our city, around what is now called the Hub. And one of the biggest things I have learned as a leader is, yes, leading through friendship is biblical and preferable. However, at the end of the day, the team you're leading needs a leader, not
Absolutely.
a friend. And those were my mistakes. Now, when I say mistakes, let me be clear. I did not know what I was doing. And I am totally fine saying that. I was 21, 22 years old. I was basically chasing after what God was doing. I was way out of my league, totally. Had no idea how to lead people because I wasn't even thinking that way, right? So what happened was this sort of formal thing shaped up a little bit, and that original tribe got hired, right? So we went from, we're just out here, a bunch of hippies just doing this together, to like, okay, now we're a formed team. And in my immaturity, I didn't know to draw the line. And the other side of this was I had no one else in my life except for them because they were my tribe. And so two things were happening. One is when the fork in the road came to be leader or friend, because those are two very different responses sometimes.
And that fork in the road is coming.
It is coming.
If you're listening, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
no, yeah, you're on the way to the
There's a
fork in the
fork
road, yeah.
where leader or friend, I was always taking the friend path because, one, I loved these people. They were my friends. But the other part of the problem that I can recognize now is I had no one else. And so if I chose the leader route, I could lose that tribe. And so for the first few years of ministry, those were the mistakes I was making out of immaturity. And so that ended up happening to me. I lost my tribe completely. And I can look back on that season now after therapy and healing. I can look back on that and I can own the fact that in my immaturity and not knowing, I was not leading. I was choosing to be friend over leading. And that's two very different things. And so what I learned, a lot of things I learned, but one, I had to learn to give myself forgiveness. I didn't know what I didn't know, but because a lot of people just go, well, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, but I still have to own up to the fact that I probably created a culture that wasn't healthy. But when I knew different, I had to make the decision to change. And so I did. And in that change is when the fallout happened. And I realized that from some of my decisions out of immaturity and because of just the situation that it was, that tribe couldn't be my tribe.
Yeah.
And that was the most painful thing. I've literally probably, when I look back on 15 years, one of the most painful things I've ever experienced is that whole mess. What I learned and have been learning is the importance when you're leading a team, the importance of having an outside tribe.
Yeah.
Because I will never forget my counselor one time told me, you need people who do not give a crap about what you do at the Hub. And I know it sounds like terrible to say, but she was right. Not that they don't care, but that's not the first thing they ask. That's not the reason they're your friend. And so building a tribe of people in my life who weren't on my payroll and weren't under my leadership was probably one of the biggest step forwards in healing for me, because I started to realize, oh, okay, there are people who want to be with me. There are people who are for me, not because of the Hub, not an attachment through the Hub. And so when I talk to leaders all the time, it's one of my favorite things to talk about is how do you do this? Like, how do you hold the tension between leading a group of people and loving them? You know what I mean? And I think we see that in the life of Jesus, that yes, he was incarnate with them, right? But he had authority and he pulled away when it came down to it. Like, he led, just freeing people up to like understand what they may be feeling if they're in leadership and they're just feeling whatever they may be feeling, gross feelings about their relationships with the teams that they're leading, is maybe to do an assessment and to say, like, is this actually healthy? Because for me, it still was unhealthy and I had to face it. In a lot of ways, I had to live out the consequences of that. And I'm not saying it was 100% on me, but I am saying that my immaturity, I had a lot of consequences to that, right? A lot of pain. But I'm totally confident owning the fact that, like, I was young, immature. I didn't know what I didn't know. But then when I knew, I had to change.
So a couple things that I want to piggyback off of that before we shift gears in a minute is one thing you said, Jesus led. Also want to come back in just a second and talk about that he left. So like before every major significant thing Jesus did, we find him alone. So there's both benefit and struggle in isolation. But one thing that is reoccurring as I listen to you talk, and I'm thinking, so my mind goes to the listener here that's just doing life. Like they're getting them going to work, their mom, their dad, their baseball coach, their teacher, nurse, all the things that we would just call normal everyday life. And when I think about that, I'm thinking from the vein of, it takes work to have good friends and to be a good friend. So like when I hear these things and the importance that you put into tribal assessment for your organization, but I also know your personal life and the people that you let into that space. And it makes me like question, how many people are surrounded by people that if they paid attention, they would never allow themselves to be surrounded by. Because maybe they met that friend in a season and that season or that person coddled X action or championed X action. So they found themselves doing life with this person or persons as they look around, then the table has grown now. So now we have that I met this friend and I was doing this, but now there's 7 other friends that are all in the similar. So it's like everywhere I look around me is death, right? But I can't get out because it's become all that I have. Because one thing we know is that there's a line in the sand when you devote yourself to a group of people. Like when you say, you know what, I'm going to protect this time. Like I have a full-time job. You have a full-time job. You got 2 kids. I have 3 kids. Our friends are similar stages of life. We don't have time to high school friend. Like I don't have time to invest my life into someone that 80% of the time is going to fail me.
Right.
I don't have the emotional space, the mental space. I don't have the physical time. So what would you say to the listener that's just a friend in a group? What would you say are 2 or 3 things of significant value that you look for in a community of people that you surround yourself with?
Yeah. So I would say, I kind of think that we don't know how to let friendships die anymore. And I have a theory why. So if I think about my childhood, it was like my best friends in elementary school. And then I moved school and I was like, new best friends, right? Like it was these seasonal relationships. I think with the introduction of like social media and being connected, that we don't feel like we can disconnect friendships because we're still connected enough online to feel some level of like, I sort of still know you kind of a situation. Right. Whereas when I was young, I was like, I'm not at your school anymore. Here's my new friends. And there was this natural part of life, which was seasonal friendships. Friendships for a time, friendships because you lived in a neighborhood or whatever it is. And I'm not trying to sound like a mean person, but like sometimes friendships are done.
Yeah.
Like they're not appropriate anymore. Sure. You know what I mean? They're not appropriate for the season of life, the stage of life. They're not appropriate for who you are now.
We should outgrow some friends.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Now we can honor
sure
that friendship at that time for that season and see that it served a purpose. But I just don't think we know how to do that. How to like transition a friendship out. And I don't have any tips for how to do that. It's a hard thing to do, but I think even thinking that way is a different way of thinking. Like
if you're having to question, should I be connected to this person? Mm-hmm. More than
probably
likely,
not. Yeah.
You shouldn't be connected to that person.
Yeah, and again, what you said about time, time is so valuable and so limited. I know for me, like in this whole process of God teaching me how to be in community, one of the things, because I'm an Enneagram 7, as you are.
Yes.
I love people. People fuel me. I love to be alone as well, but like my preference is to be with people, and I'm a people collector. Like I just love everyone. But what I had to learn was I had to learn how to be picky with who I let in at what level.
Right.
Because I am limited. So also another whole other podcast, but another thing I've learned, I have limits, and part of those limits are relational. Like I only have the ability to maintain a literal certain amount of relationships. Mm-hmm. For me, that's less now than it ever has been because we live in 2 cities and, we're moving not in an unhealthy pace of life, but a pace of life that's different. So I can't just collect all these friendships and not be able to engage in them in a way that serves that friendship. And so I had to learn how to draw a small circle. And how to, instead of going wide, go deep with a smaller amount of people. And I think people need to hear that too, that it's okay to tighten your circle seasonally. There may be times of your life where that's not necessary, but if you're walking through suffering, if you're walking through something hard, if maybe you have a bunch of kids and life is crazy, you may need a tighter circle because we just have limits to what we're able to maintain. And then I would say too, about being a friend, is be honest about what kind of friend you can be. Because when you're not, the expectation game is a killer. And as awkward as this is, I've learned and had to learn how to just say like, hey, I can't be that right now for this new person. Out of protection of that person and out of setting the proper expectations. And I think another thing that I've learned is friendships can be at different levels. Friendships can be closer to you or a little more distance from you, that you get to decide, who's the closest in your life and who is just connected to you, but that you have to have proper expectations for people. So and expectations will kill a relationship. Like if I have hidden expectations of my relationship with you and you don't know about them and you're not meeting them all the time, then like, that's a terrible equation. My husband Brent makes fun of me all the time for my DTRs, but I don't care because I'm like, hey, at least everything's out on the table.
That's right.
And at least I am saying everything I need to say. Like, for example, a month ago, I was starting to feel a little isolated again, just a little because we were traveling again. And it was just kind of like our life, just the pace picked back up. And so I sent a text out to my tribe of people, my inside community, and said, hey, no one's asked me this and that's okay. You didn't know to ask me this, but here's what's coming up for me in the next few weeks. We're going to Denver. Here's what's going to happen there. We're going here. Here's what's going to happen there. I didn't want to do that without you knowing. And that decision, it's a game changer because then those 5 people knew where I was, knew what I was doing, knew what to pray for. And guess what they did the entire next 2 weeks? They checked on me specifically. Hey, you said you had this meeting that day. How'd it go? For me, I just know from experience and from the pain that I've walked through that I don't believe that it's lonely at the top. I think that's a load of bull. I censored myself. And so I consistently am choosing to live differently than that. I'm choosing to say, hey, like this may not matter. It matters to me. I'm leaving town. I don't want to just leave town and people not know. Yeah. I mean, my team here knows and they're incredibly supportive, but my other, my friends, my outside friends, because it would have been easy for me to just go and come back. And honestly, maybe they wouldn't have even known, right? Because everyone's busy and it would have been like, you want to hang out? Oh, I'm out of town. Oh, okay. Right. But instead, I was like, man, I don't want to feel that way though. I want them to know what I'm doing. And so that's a new thing I've started as of this, year, just saying like, here's what's coming up, kind of like a agenda for my life, because it is a little crazy sometimes. Here's what I need prayer for. Boom, there it is. And letting them, like that's a gift to them. Yeah. And that's what I've learned.
Yeah. So you said one thing that I want to jump to, and it's like, there's benefit to being alone. We see that in the life of Jesus, that Jesus got away. He got a word. He spent time alone. I think a lot of people are lonely. I want you to speak to maybe some specific examples, maybe some things that you've learned from some of the Hub family that you guys minister to about how being isolated is unhealthy, because we were created for communal living. So what are some dangers that you've seen that maybe we can expose to the listener, and maybe some things we can do to combat that?
Yeah. So I think, when I think about our friends that live on the street and some of the things that are said about them, like, well, they just went crazy and threw a trash can across the street, or like something, they have these outbursts and people are like, man, I just wish they wouldn't act that way. If they didn't act that way, then, maybe businesses would be okay with them being around, or, these are things we hear a lot. Well, the reason they act that way is because they have no one. And when you have no one, there are no expectations on your life. If what you do doesn't matter to someone, what you do doesn't matter. Yeah. And you begin to, when you are in isolation, the lie you begin to believe is that my actions don't get a reaction because there is no one here to react. And so those like outlandish behaviors that we see often are a byproduct of isolation. When you don't have people are also friction. When you have people in your life, like you can't just act any kind of way. You know what I mean? Like when you're showing up to work and you're around people, or when you're around your family, or when you're with your friends, there's a little wiggle room, but like if you have good people, you get past that wiggle room and they're going to be like, hey, what's wrong? And what that tells your brain is, my actions get a reaction. My actions matter. So when you live in isolation, you begin to believe that what I do doesn't matter. And so therefore I can do whatever I want, because there isn't any real personal effect of my actions, because I don't have anyone. And so it kind of leads to this feeling that like I can live however I want to live. I can do whatever I want to do, because no one cares. Isolation also removes accountability. It removes expectation, meaning that when I wake up every day, there's some level of expectation of people on me, right? Like, and that's healthy. Like I'm supposed to be at work. And like just today, so there's another Cassie on our team too, Cassie. She's over in this office right here. But she texted Jesse and I at like 9:30, like, where y'all at? Well, that's what I'm talking about. If I don't show up somewhere, somebody's going to ask. And that's comforting. Sometimes people can be like, oh, that's a drag. But if you go the opposite way and you don't have that, you would want that more than anything.
Somebody to check.
Just somebody to say, where you at? So I think living in isolation removes that. It removes this idea that I'm expected somewhere. Something's expected out of me. And that's also how we were created, to tend to something,
well, it
right?
gives you purpose.
Yeah, like exactly. So those are the few things that come to my mind whenever I think about, the dangers of isolation. And even kind of more extreme on like the human trafficking side, we see a huge tactic of pimps is actually isolation. It's actually one of the biggest tactics that they use in the process, which is called the grooming process of moving someone from just a random person they've never met to working for them. And isolation is a big chunk of that. And why is because when you pull someone away from their people, their family, their job, their church, whatever, you can tell them whatever you want to tell them. And you can kind of create a new reality, right? If you keep someone isolated away. And so we see that a lot too. We see a lot of fear of relationship with victims of trafficking, but that's because their pimp has sort of set up this idea that I'm the only one you can trust. And so isolation also creates sort of this distrust of other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just said something that, me being a pastor and a leader in the religious community, that said when the pimp pulls them away, it's in that isolated place where you begin to believe whatever they're feeding you.
That's right.
And I think the majority of the people that are listening today prayerfully aren't going to be
not there. Yeah.
on the traffic side. But it's also in isolation where you begin to believe everything that the enemy would say to you. Like,
Everything you read on Facebook.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's the truth.
You'd
Yeah.
be like, man, this is true. I don't have anybody to bounce this off of. There's nobody speaking, life into me. So maybe I am unworthy of friendship. Maybe I am going to be forever alone. Maybe I am unworthy of love. Maybe I am all these things because in isolation, the only person you can talk to is yourself. So you're totally dependent on your personal health in the conversation. And I know there's times in my life where I wouldn't take my own advice.
I don't want to be with myself.
I don't want to hang out with me. So why in the world would I ever? So isolation's a dangerous place.
It is dangerous.
Plus, when you have a tribe, I mean, let's be honest, it feels good to know that your people want to show up for you.
Yeah.
Like if you're experiencing sickness or death or trauma in your life or loss of a loved one or anything like that, to know that there are people that see me, see my family, see my need, and at the drop of a hat are going to be there.
Yeah. And I would say too, like I'm living out a healing version. So like shout out to the team I'm leading right now here at the Hub. God uses that team of people to reflect back to me the possibilities that, like, if you're a leader listening, like it is totally possible for you to lead a tribe of people that are for you.
Absolutely.
Like that's, and I'm experiencing that. And again, you have to be good at it. You have to hold that line. But I know for us, we'll even verbalize and say like, hey, is it okay for me to share this? If not, I won't. But it's totally possible. I'm right now we've been talking about this week here at our ministry we feel like we're watching a harvest happen this last week. It's not always like that. It's just been like that this week. And God reminded me this morning as I was thinking about this tribe conversation that like, I actually think I'm seeing a harvest in the team I'm leading right now, because it is a team of people that reflect love back to me and are for me and let me be vulnerable and let me grieve and let me pop confetti cannons every Tuesday, every week, because I do that a lot. Let me be fully me and allow for there to be boundaries. And that's the gift of the team I'm leading right now. So I did want to say before we close, like it is totally possible to hold that middle ground, not just if you're a leader, but in your own friendships. And I feel like the team that God has given the Hub right now has been just as much like a healing balm for my own life, because it's showing me, one, the fruit of growth and maturity in my own life. And I'm so thankful that Holy Spirit did not let me stay right where I was. So I know a lot of what I'm experiencing is fruit of the work that God's done in me, but I'm just thankful to have a team of people who can hold both right? And that I can be completely myself with, knowing that those boundaries are also there.
Yeah.
And it's possible.
Which is so great. Yeah, so we're gonna cap that. It's not gonna be a far stretch for you guys to hear from Cassie again at some point. So I do want to encourage the listener, like if you're listening today and you're like, wow, man, that sounds foreign or sounds so hard. It's really not. Your tribe doesn't need to be 60 deep, man. If you consider yourself blessed if you have 3 or 4 people that you can call on. And I do want you to know that your tribe is not necessarily your Sunday school class. Think about some things that we said today, some identifying factors. And if you are constantly surrounded by people all the time, but yet you are struggling with severe isolation, you need to do some tribal work. You need to ask the Holy Spirit to reveal to you the things in your life that are causing you to be isolated, and also the natural decisions that you're making that could be isolating you from people. Maybe it's sin in your life, decisions you're making, the things that you're into that people that you would want speaking into your life are not into. So therefore, there's a natural separation. So don't be afraid to get honest with the Holy Spirit and ask Him to be the great revealer, so you can live in community with people. So Cassie, thank you.
Thank you
so much. Before we wrap up, I got a couple people I want to thank. Thank you guys for being patient with us. The Resurrection and Waiting team is really just some guys on my church staff that believed in this vision, and we all have jobs and we all have families, and we are working the best that we can to get it going. So thank you for being patient with us.
I mean, it is in your name. In waiting, yeah. So we could be a once a quarter kind of deal, but we're trying to get them out every single month. I also want to thank Rolanda Knight at Movement Mortgage for sponsoring this episode. This episode was brought to you by her. If you have any questions about mortgage lending or getting in a house or rental properties or anything like that, reach out to her and her team. All of her information is going to be included in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you for tuning in. We think you guys are awesome. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you're fixing to see Cassie's life in motion. If not, get ready for the boom. Thank you guys for listening to Resurrection and Waiting podcast. See you next time.